Hello, we are the Lorcana Twins. Thank you for joining us on this very special episode as we discuss the final first chapter reveals in the Disney Lorcana trading card game.
Yeah, since our last video, the Lorcana team revealed the last fourth or so of the first chapter. So now we know all the cards that are going to be in the first set, and we can start looking at potential deck building ideas and which cards we want to chase after when we're opening packs. It's a really exciting time. So to be sure we've covered every card on the channel in the set, we're going to go over the ones that have been recently revealed.
Yeah, so without further ado, we will be using Lorcania.com to kind of review these cards with you. And so a big shout out to Artem over at Lorcania.com for putting this resource together. It's been very nice as we've waited for each card to be spoiled to have a quick resource to see the new cards that have been coming out. So here we are. The first card we will discuss is Teika, Heartless. This is a 6-cost inkable card with a 5/5 stat line, Dreamborn Villain Deity, and the effect is Seek the Heart. During your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you gain 2 lore. The other interesting thing is Teika has 2 lore, so whether you're questing with this for 2, or you're banishing something in a challenge and getting 2, you're always getting that 2 lore, which is really nice because, you know, there's going to be times where you need to do a challenge on board and you can progress towards your win condition at the same time. And this is a legendary rarity, so, you know, will be harder to find this one, but I think it looks pretty fantastic. A great card for fans of the Moana film.
Absolutely.
And just really fun to see.
Yeah, and the art's really cool as well. And yeah, so that is Teika, Heartless. And now we have Starkey, Hook's Henchman. This is an uncommon, 5-cost, inkable, 5 strength, 4 willpower character with 1 lore. And he has the ability Aye Captain, which says while you have a captain character in play, this character gets +1 lore. So this is lending itself to a captain type or pirate type synergy deck. And, you know, the stat line is pretty good for the cost. The 1 lore, you know, might leave you a little wanting for a cost of 5, but with the ability, he could get up to 2 lore as long as you have a captain in play. So it looks like an interesting card, and the ink ability helps it out too. So that's a cool card there.
Yeah, he's definitely one you could try to build a deck around where you put in a bunch of different captain subtypes. So
Yep.
Next we have Plasma Blaster. This is a 3-cost non-inkable item. It is a rare card and it has the ability Quick Shot. Exert and pay 2 ink to deal 1 damage to chosen character. So what's nice about this is once you get it out, you know, if you ever need to deal 1 damage to something and you have 2 resources to spare, you can use Plasma Blaster, you know, once per turn. And then you can, you know, do an extra kind of a ping damage on a unit that might be sitting around there with 1 extra health. Or maybe you have something that can trade into a unit and then finish it off with Plasma Blaster. So there's some good applications here. And it will sit on your board as an item. So, you know, it's kind of just something you can use repeatedly throughout the remainder of the game.
Yep, it might seem like it's a little expensive cost-wise, but it could have a lot of good uses, as you said, especially with things like the Tinkerbell that shifts out and does 1 damage to everything, and then can sing, you know, grab your swords. Maybe it does 2 damage to everything with that. So anything sitting at the 3 health line, you know, grab your swords wouldn't quite finish off, but Plasma Blaster would be able to ping that down. So yeah, I mean, the longer the game goes, the more value you could potentially get. And now we have the Steel Lilo, Galactic Hero. I think this art's really fun. I know this image had been teased a while back, and we were all curious what this Lilo would end up being like, and kind of would have guessed that she would have an ability, but she is actually vanilla, but she is 3 costs, inkable, 4/2, so that's a very strong, you know, stat line with the 4 strength at a cost of 3. Only 2 willpower, so a little weaker there, but also in conjunction with the high strength, she actually gets 2 lore, which is quite a bit for a cost of 3 compared to most characters. So a very interesting statted card. And, you know, if you're feeling a little riskier, you know, and willing to run this, she can get you more lore, and she could potentially trade up into things that cost more than her. So I think it is a very interesting card that might be worth running in decks. And again, love the art on that. That is an uncommon.
Now next we have Aladdin, Cornered Swordsman. He is a 2-cost inkable 2/1 Storyborn hero, also has no effect, and he has 2 lore. So this is another kind of aggressive lore card. He only has that 1 willpower, so he's vulnerable to things like that Plasma Blaster or just Tinkerbell Giant Fairy coming down. You know, he would die as soon as she hits the board.
Also, Hans has an ability that can ping for 1.
And yes, the Steel Hans has a great ability that could clear this guy very easily. So, definitely more of an aggressive card to run if you want to risk playing this Aladdin. I think if you're running a Steel Ruby deck, it gives you a different shift target option for, your Outlaw Aladdin card. That's where I see maybe considering using this the most, or if you're really going for a Lore Rush deck. But other than that, I think that 1 willpower is going to be a pretty big weakness here. But, definitely something you can consider in an Aladdin deck or an aggressive lore deck.
Mm-hmm. And next we have Donald Duck, the long-awaited third Musketeer. He is 4 cost, inkable, with 2 strength and 5 willpower. So yeah, for 4 cost, that's a pretty high willpower there. And he has Bodyguard, so that'll help him out to have a better willpower. And he has the Stay Alert ability, which says during your turn, your Musketeer characters gain Evasive. So if you combo him with the Mickey Musketeer and the Goofy, then all your Bodyguard Musketeers will get Evasive on their turn. So that's not only a way to protect, your other characters with the Bodyguard function, but in case your opponent is running a lot of evasive characters, you'll now have a way to go after them on your turn as well. So that completes the Musketeer set, at least for the first chapter here. And yeah,
I think they have some interesting tools, especially when they're all combined together. So
yeah, and we were curious which ink color he would be, thinking it would probably be the amber or the steel, and he is here in steel.
Next up, we have Fishbone Quill, which is a very interesting new item that was revealed for Sapphire. It is a 3 cost inkable, and it is a rare card as well, with the effect Go Ahead and Sign. So you exert the Fishbone Quill, and then you may put any card from your hand into your inkwell face down. So what's cool about this is you can get rid of some of your non-inkable cards, because Fishbone Quill lets you, use them as ink, whereas normally you could not. And it allows you to, play 2 ink in 1 turn, because you're allowed your 1 ink per turn, and then this card, the effect, lets you play another. So if you need to play like a very heavy ramp deck, especially with this amazing Bell card that we'll see later, I think Fishbone Quill would be a great option to consider just because of how fast it can ramp you out. I think the one concern I have is how quick this will deplete your hand, so it'd be nice if you could find a way to get some hand replenishment, possibly using like a Beast's Mirror or like a Whole New World if you're playing the steel color. Things like that might help this card do a little bit better. So
yep. And then we have Eye of the Fates, a 4 cost inkable item in Sapphire. With an ability, See the Future. You exert, and then chosen character gets +1 lore this turn. So I think that just at a base level looks pretty exciting and interesting. It might seem a little expensive, but items can be used the turn they're played, so you can kind of surprise people. Maybe it looks like you can't win that turn, like you're 1 away, but you drop this, and it helps you quest for the win and get to 20 lore. Or maybe you use it in conjunction with a character like the Sapphire Ariel, who is able to ready every time you play an item. So if you could give her an extra lore, then if she's able to quest multiple times in a turn using her ability, this would just get even more value. And then again, just the fact that it sticks around every turn, like you're able to get an extra lore like once per turn every time you send someone on a quest, so that'll really add up over the course of the game. So if you can find a time to play it, and if you're doing a ramp deck, you probably will have plenty of ink, then you can work this in and get a lot of lore off of it. So I really like the card, and the Fates, they're some cool characters from Hercules, so I'm glad to see them get a cool shout out here with this card.
Yeah, I think it's awesome that once you have that down, as long as you're going on a quest with something in a turn, you're always going to get 1 more than you normally would, and that might help just get you there in the end. So next we have Tamatoa, So Shiny. He is an 8 cost inkable, 5/8 Storyborn villain, super rare, and his first ability is What Have We Here? When you play this character and whenever he quests, you may return an item card from your discard to your hand. So this seems like definitely intended to be in an item deck. The ability to grab an item card that may be in your discard pile for some reason, and then also to do that every time you quest will be helpful. And then also his second ability is Glam. This character gets +1 lore for each item you have in play. So if you've played a decent number of items throughout your game, and then you find Tamatoa, his lore count really has no ceiling other than how many items you can fit in your deck and how many you can get out by the time he's on the board. So I'd be curious to see like the perfect list for a deck that wants to run this. I think it's really going to be one of the harder decks to figure out, just because a lot of the item decks, it seems like they need a lot of different pieces and they kind of need them in a certain order.
And you'll fall behind on board while you're playing all the items and not developing characters. But
I love that they're creating the ability to try to make a deck like that, and I think as each set comes out and we get more items to choose from and other cards that might support the item strategy, I think this card could just get better and better, and it's already looking, very imposing. So I think it's a sweet looking card too. The gold on his shell really is as shiny as it says.
Yeah, I think this is a very fun looking card to build a deck around. Super rare. And, there is a decent amount of item removal in the game, especially if people are playing steel. So, yeah, I mean, if someone destroys one of your items on the way up while you're ramping to get up to play this guy, you can just grab it back. And then at that point, maybe you want to play it down, boost his lore count, or you can always ink it if you still happen to need additional ink for whatever reason. So, a really nice, versatile looking card here.
And there's some other ways like items might end up in the discard. For example, if your opponent plays a whole new world and you had some items, some of them will go to the discard. And then, of course, some items like Frying Pan, you banish it to use the effect.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
It might be in there for that reason, and then he can just grab it back. And at that point, it's a pretty cheap cost to play it again, and that might help your Ariel, if you're using the blue Ariel, get some more questing value as well.
Yeah, I love the art on this too, and the way that it is just so fitting with the movie. Like, he's hoarding all his possessions, so trying to collect as many items as he can and then get more lore off of it. That's very cool design there. And now we have Philoctetes, Trainer of Heroes, a 2-cost inkable character with 3 strength and 1 willpower, but he has the support keyword and 1 lore, so he is able to give an ally a 3 strength boost whenever he quests. So that is pretty substantial, especially for the fact that he only costs 2 ink. And we're huge fans of the Hercules franchise, so it was very cool to see Phil get included in the first set as well.
Yeah, I'm hoping set 2 we get like more Hercules cards as well, and maybe some of the other supporting casts like Pegasus, Pain and Panic are always really funny.
Yeah, I was surprised they weren't in the first chapter, but
that's
I'm sure
what's so cool
room.
is this game can just expand with each next set, and they can continue to tell the story and kind of fill out the different rosters from all these films that are already included, and add some new films as well. So going to be a fun journey just to watch, the way this set evolves, and set 2 and 3 and 4 and so on.
Absolutely.
All right, next up we have another Hercules character. This is awesome looking card, I think.
One of my favorite arts of the set, for sure.
Yeah, Hades always has just a look about him like he's really commanding and sinister. And so this is a 7-cost, non-inkable, Hades Infernal Schemer. He's a Dreamborn villain deity. He's a legendary rarity, so I probably won't get as much of this card as I would like, but I'm hopeful. He is a 3/6 stat line, and he has 2 lore, and his ability, is there a downside to this? When you play this character, you may put chosen opposing character into their player's inkwell face down. So essentially this is the Let It Go card effect built right onto the character, and as we know, that card costs 5 ink but can be sung for free, whereas this one, on top of, if you had to cast Let It Go for 5, the extra 2 ink here is getting you a 3/6 body on board with 2 lore. So this could be a nice tempo card kind of at the end of a game to kind of clear up their board while pushing some pressure down on your side. And at this point in the game, that extra little ramp that you're giving them, it might not be as significant. If you're singing Let It Go on 5 or playing it on 5, that's maybe kind of a crucial part in the game where people are reaching kind of the top of their ink line. And so I think with Hades coming down for 7, this might not be as detrimental, and always clearing up their board and progressing your board is a good thing to do. So I think the only thing that hurts this is the non-inkability and the 7 costs.
And it's not a shift character like the other Hades, King of Olympus.
So yeah, it might get stuck in your hand at times, but if you're playing some ramp too, I think you won't have too much of a problem getting to 7 inks.
Yep, very cool looking card in that legendary rarity. And the Lorcana team also recently launched their companion app, which is an amazing looking app. And what's cool on there too is you can look at each card in its regular and foil version, and I can say that this card is looking amazing in that foil version from the preview we were able to get on that app.
I have a feeling too, like seeing it in person will be the absolute best, Even like a digital image, I bet it can't do the full justice to the cards. And so I'm even more excited to see what these look like when we get them in our
And
hands.
we still don't know how rare a foil legendary will be to pull. So, hopefully we do get to see one in person at some point. But moving right along, we have Chief Tui, respected leader. It's a 7-cost inkable Storyborn King mentor with, again, the support keyword, which he is a 3 strength, 6 willpower character, so he will be lending his 3 strength to an ally anytime he quests. And then he has 3 lore, so he is on the heavier end for the lore, which is nice to see. So yeah, it's also interesting, like Phil has, a cost of 2, and he also lends 3 strength, whereas you have to pay 7 for Chief Tui to get that same 3 strength support. But here I think it's really his 6 willpower and that 3 lore that will make him more difficult to remove. And you could maybe get multiple supports out of him, and he's definitely a character that looks like you'll want to be questing with to collect that lore. So if you're ramping especially, I think this is a decent option to include.
And something I like too about the support keyword on a big body like this is, let's say you're ramping with the 3-cost Sapphire Mickey. A lot of times he sits around on board as a 1/3 with 1 lore, and maybe he doesn't seem very threatening, and your opponent might rather quest than take time getting him off the table. And if they choose to go that route, well, maybe you drop down a Chief Tui, and then on the following turn, your Mickey could potentially swing for 4 damage as Chief Tui collects 3 lores. So, interesting way to consider using that support keyword.
Yep, it'll just make any of your other characters more threatening, and they'll be able to see it coming maybe a little bit because, you can't quest with Chief Tui right away. But yeah, it just might make your opponent wish they had kind of dealt with some of your weenier characters, earlier, before now they have potential to pose a combat threat as well. So
next up, we have another character from Moana. This is a 6-cost non-inkable version of Te Kā, the Burning One. It's a Storyborn villain deity with 8 strength and 6 willpower. And it has the Reckless keyword, and you'll notice there is no lore. So this is another thing where it can't quest, so I guess there's no point for it to have any lore on the card. And then it is super rare. So this one I see as being definitely having some downsides, being that you can't ink it and you can't quest with it. So if you're at a point in the game where you really need that lore, and this is kind of what you draw, if you're top decking or whatever, it'll be a disappointment to be sure, because challenging is definitely more of a reactive process where you have to wait for your opponent to quest for lore first, unless you have a way to exert their characters. So this definitely will help you kind of do some board control after they quest, because with an 8/6 stat line, it's going to stick around a while and it can trade out with almost anything in the game. But the real question is that worth the trade-off of this being not inkable and having no lore? So
yeah, I think it's interesting, like when you compare this to Dragonfire, which costs 5 and can target remove any character it wants as long as it doesn't have ward or whatever. This one, you'll have to wait till they're already exerted so you can challenge them. But, with this stat line for this cost, you could, potentially get 2 or even 3 trades. So to be able to remove maybe 2 or 3 of their cards for just 1 of yours, it creates a lot of board pressure if they do try to quest, which they have to try to win, or if they do any challenging of their own. So I think, it's interesting to see how much play this will see and how effective it'll be, but the stat line is definitely big, and it can basically take out any character we've seen in the first chapter in one hit, except maybe the Triton, who has 9 willpower. So it looks like,
I think as long as you get 2 trades out of this, it'll feel like it might have been worth it. If you only get 1 and maybe they ping it off with a damage spell to kind of finish it after it's taken some damage, then I think it's probably a little less worth, but you're still eating a card, so it's a threat they have to deal with. And
one more vulnerability this card might have is that it's very susceptible to a certain Moana card's effect that we're going to touch on pretty soon here. So that's maybe one downside, but it's unclear how much play that Moana will see either. So,
and I really hope we get like Te Fiti maybe in the next set.
Oh yes,
because I could see her being possibly like Amber and doing some healing as she kind of heals the earth and heals the islands which were afflicted, while Te Kā was kind of burning and upset and missing her heart. So I'd be curious to see what they might do with Te Fiti if she's in the next chapter maybe.
Yeah, me too. Well, next we have Peter Pan. This is his second card in the set, Fearless Fighter. He's a 3-cost uninkable character with Rush. He's a hero and Storyborn. He has 3 strength, 2 willpower, and 1 lore. So Kind of like the Rafiki, which we've seen in Amethyst, only he has one less willpower here. Same lore otherwise and same cost. But yeah, it's nice to see another Peter Pan, and this just gives Ruby, a rush option as well to kind of try to control the board early. I mean, unless you're rushing into like a 1 strength unit, like maybe the 1-drop Captain Hook, if they've already got a challenge out of him. Most things would probably take this out, but you would potentially be able to trade up in some cases if there's any 4-drops with 3 willpower.
I like the angle of this card too.
Yeah.
Just the way he's
and
kind of
the
diving down
coloration
from
is
the
pretty
sky.
nice too in the sky.
Yeah, you can see the mast and the pirate flag up top.
Yep.
Creates a nice image.
But yeah, just a different kind of removal option almost for Ruby with this Rush Peter Pan.
Next up, we have another Moana card. This is a lot of Moana cards in Ruby.
This is the one Teika's got to watch out for.
Yeah, so this is a 5-cost Inkable, chosen by the ocean. She is a 2/6 stat line, Storyborn Hero Princess, so she does fit into that princess faction. She has 2 lore, so that's pretty decent for 5 cost. The strength isn't great, but the willpower means she might stick around a while. And then the effect, this is not who you are. When you play this character, you may banish chosen character named Teika. So it's a very niche effect. It's only specific scenarios this is going to come into play. I think most likely we'll see more people playing like competitively the Steel Teika just because of the nice effect of when it banishes something, you still get that 2 lore. And because it's inkable, I think that makes it more playable than the Ruby Teika. But I do think Steel is very popular with a lot of players right now, and so that's a card they might be putting in there. And if that's popular and you want to run a Ruby deck, maybe you try to counter just the possibility of a Teika by throwing in a Moana or 2 or something. But yeah, or if you're running a princess deck, this is a decent option because the 2 lore, maybe she gets restanded by her Amber version that lets you restand your other princesses after they've quested. So, she's a flexible card. I think she really has to fit your strategy for you to want to put this in there because I'm not sure she's like totally getting full value for that cost, and the effect is probably not going to happen too much.
But yeah, I could see in a princess deck with the other Moana card, that 6 willpower is kind of hard to remove, especially at that cost of 5. And if you're able to, get multiple turns questing and maybe restanding them with the other Moana, that could be, pretty strong, especially if people if they kind of leave her alone for a while because they don't respect her 2 strength or whatever. So
yeah, I think high willpower and a decent amount of lore is kind of makes any card decent, and this card that at least has that going for it. So
yep, and cool art. And now here we have Maui, Hero to All, 5-cost inkable unit, Hero Storyborn Deity with Rush and Reckless. So it has to challenge each turn if able. Can't quest, and it doesn't have any lore on it anyway. And then I think for a cost of 5 and the fact that this is inkable and it has a stat line of 6/5, I think that's really strong for this cost. And again, a really nice like board control card, I think, where you can rush in and probably clear off just about anything that would be played at this cost level. You can kind of see then when you're making a trade if he'll stick around or not, and how much remaining HP he'd still have or willpower. So I think this one could definitely get multiple trades, especially if you're trading against certain, like a Goofy, for example, that has 3 strength and 6 willpower. I mean, Maui would still stick around with 2 more willpower, and his 6 damage is gonna take out multiple things. So I think this has a lot of potential if you're playing more of a value, try to control the board type of deck. So it won't get you any lore off of itself, but it can kind of pave the way for your other questers to go on quests unimpeded while he kind of cleans up and protects them. So that is Maui, Hero to All.
And next up, we have Dr. Facilier's cards, and this is a 2-cost non-inkable item in Emerald, and it has an effect, the cards will tell. So you exert this, and then you pay 1 less ink for the next action you play this turn. So once you get this down, basically for the rest of the game, as long as it doesn't get removed, you get to reduce the cost of at least of the first action you play each turn. So it's really nice that once you've played 3 actions, you've come out ahead on this in terms of ink cost. And there is that Emerald Mickey that, you know, benefits off of the number of actions you're playing. There's also a lot of green actions like Do It Again that let you pull back another action. So if you want to build an action-focused deck that makes a lot of use of that type of card, then this might be a really cost-effective way to kind of reduce the ink you need to pay for actions throughout the game, and then you'll have extra ink available to kind of pay for other cards as you play out your next turns.
And as we've seen with the Lantern card, if you have multiple in play, then it'll actually, if you use them both, it'll reduce the next character you play by 2. And here the same applies, so if you have 2 of these in play, then the next action you play this turn would cost 2 less. So yeah, I mean, there's potential over the course of a long game to get a lot of value out of this initial investment.
And it's just neat that every time a new action is released in future sets, you know, it's another target for this card to potentially reduce the cost of, and that's really nice. So
yep, and now we have Tinkerbell, most helpful, who's a Storyborn ally fairy at the cost of 4. You can ink the Tink, and she has evasive, 2 strength, 3 willpower, and 2 lore. And then she has the Pixie Dust ability, which says when you play this character, chosen character gains evasive this turn. So already she's got the same stat line and cost as Pongo with 2 lore and evasive. So I think she's just already seems to be a little bit better than him with the fact that she's also got this additional ability, Pixie Dust. And that's just kind of interesting, like if your opponent is playing some evasives, like maybe they've got a Pascal on the board that you can't get to, you can give one of your characters that you already have in play evasive, and then they can go, you know, challenge the opponent's evasive characters. So that's kind of neat there, just a little extra tech piece that you could run if you're concerned about evasives and maybe you're playing a color that doesn't have a whole lot of that. So I think that's pretty cool, this Tinkerbell.
Yeah, and it's got the same cost and stats and lore as Pongo, so it's nice that this one also has that Pixie Dust effect.
Yep.
Next up is Tamatoa, Drab Little Crab. So this is a vanilla 2-cost inkable. He is a 1/4 Dreamborn character with 1 lore pip. And really what's interesting about this is I think this is the only, you know, 2-drop that has that 4 willpower, as far as I know of. I mean, Dr. Facilia, there is like a 0/4 one for him, but you know, this one has at least that base 1 stat.
Without
so
like an effect or
he
keyword.
he might come out, and this could be a good thing to play if you're worried about a lot of like 1/1 stat lines. I mean, he would trade into several of those before he goes down. Also, Emerald has some buff cards where you can increase strength. So let's say you played a Megara right after this, you know, he could become a 3/4. As kind of like a surprise, and then he probably sticks around some more, and then, you know, if they don't take time to get him off the board, he gets you 1 lore for a while. So I think he's kind of an interesting stat line, and he's always inkable. So
I think the art on this one's really fun too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Very cool to see Tamatoa as a young crab.
Yes.
And here we have Genie, a rare 8-cost uninkable character, hero, and Floodborn. So it has shift 6. You can pay 6 to play this on top of a character named Genie. Has evasive and 3 lore, so that right there is very impressive. And then it has the Sinister Slither here. Your character's, nope, that's just coming in from the Flotsam card, never mind, but it does have Phenomenal Cosmic Power, which says that whenever this character quests, you can play an action with cost 5 or less for free. So that sounds very strong. Just, you know, certain ones come to mind, like Dragonfire or Grab Your Sword. But, you know, even just cheaper ones as well that might have value at any given time in the game, like Part of Your World or Friends on the Other Side, depending on what colors you're playing. Other Emerald actions like Do It Again or Mother Knows Best. So this has a lot of potential, a lot of tempo you can get, especially if you were to shift this out on 6. I mean, then if your, you know, base Genie was ready to go, you could immediately quest for 3. He's evasive, so you don't really have to worry about them challenging back. And then you can drop us, you know, an action card basically for free as long as it costs 5 or less. So a lot of big potential here with this Genie card. I think, you know, the 8 costs uninkable might, you know, make it clog up your deck sometimes, especially if you're also planning on running the 6-cost Genie, because that's also an uninkable card with a strong effect, evasive and 2 lore. So, you know, finding the right blend or number of each copy of the cards to run might be difficult, especially too because the grab your swords that was mentioned, Dragonfire, a lot of those actions, Mother Knows Best, they're all uninkable as well. So I think finding the ideal list might be a challenge, but if you can, I think there's humongous potential with this Powers Unleashed Genie. Very cool.
And I feel like he probably works well in a deck that wants to run a lot of actions so that you'll have some good cards to play and get value off of his effect. So possibly a deck where you'd also want to use that Emerald Mickey that can do some control every time you cast an action.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Dr. Facilier's cards so that you can afford actions a little cheaper at other parts of the game. This time it's obviously free, but you know, I think that'll be a deck that maybe gets better with time. I'm not sure if like all the pieces are necessarily there right now, and I do think, you know, the best shift target for this would be the 2 cost. I'm not sure that going on top of the 6 cost would get you a whole lot of value. You'd get that 1 extra lore, but it'd probably be better to go wide if you could pay for it. So.
Yep. And yeah, I think some ink colors as well, like Emerald is kind of one of them. They don't have a ton of card draw options. The Mad Hatter comes to mind for Emerald, but you know, outside of that, so if you're not paired with, you know, another ink color that has a lot of card draw, at least what Emerald does have going for it is the ability to recur cards, which is kind of an alternate form of the card draw. So cards like Do It Again, which you could also play for free off the Genie's ability, could kind of keep that loop going. So interesting potential there. Really like to see this card, Genie.
All right, next up we have Freeze. This is a 2 cost non-inkable action in the Amethyst ink, and the effect is Exert chosen opposing character. So this is basically the same effect that is on the 3 cost Elsa, where Elsa exerts and then gets to exert a chosen opposing character. Here you get to kind of surprise them with this from your hand because they won't see it on board. So if you're playing a deck where you can suddenly exert something and maybe you have some units ready to go that can challenge and get rid of that character, that could be very helpful. You know, they might have some valuable targets that they're not exerting, and this is just kind of a way to get at that. So I definitely see it as a control piece. The uninkability I don't love, but it does, because like sometimes you might want to ink this early game if you don't really have a board set up for it, and you're like, oh, this has to sit in my hand for a long time. But other than that, you know, it might not hurt to run some of this if you're running a very control-based deck.
Yes. And next we have a card we've been waiting to see for quite some time. It is Legendary Ursula. She's 7 cost, uninkable, and she has the ability It's Too Easy. It says when you play this character, each opponent loses 1 lore. You may draw a card for each 1 lore lost this way. So that has a lot of potential, especially in multiplayer, in terms of the card draw. I mean, each opponent losing 1 lore may or may not make too big of a difference, but, you know, for each opponent, you're getting to draw an extra card. But even just, you know, in a one-on-one type of game, you're at least, you know, if your opponent has any lore, you're at least going to be drawing a card, replacing yourself, and then her stat line is quite impressive. 2 strength, 8 willpower, but with 3 lore. So she's going to be hard to remove in combat anyways, and then that 3 lore is pretty substantial. So yeah, it seems like an even better card in multiplayer, but still pretty good just in a standard 1v1, especially if you're able to get up to that 7 ink, like if you're ramping or something like that. So a really cool art as well.
Yes, I was going to say the flavor text, the first rule of villainy, if you're going to be evil, you've got to have style. And I think this card really has great style. Props to the artist on this one, because the way that her cauldron is kind of glowing and she's peering into it, and then her tentacles are really curling around the whole frame, just setting up a great, you know, great frame for this artwork.
Yeah, and I also think it's neat how we haven't touched on the cauldron yet, but there is a cauldron card in the set as well, and it's cool to see, you know, when some of the images from one card find their way into another. You know, it really feels like they worked well and seamlessly together behind the scenes to tell a cohesive story.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite looking cards in the set, actually. It's pretty high up there for me, so
yeah, it's great.
I'm hoping to pull one just for that, and I think it's just an exciting character in general. And moving right along, we have the Queen.
Another exciting character.
Yes, Wicked and Vain. This is another she's a storyborn villain, Queen, and she is 5 cost inkable with a 4/5 stat line. And 1 lore, but I think why you would really want to play this is for her effect. I summon thee, so you can exert to draw a card. So card draw is just very important in games, and the fact that, you know, she can start getting you a card every turn on top of the card that you draw at the beginning of your turn, that would just help you see more options. And if your opponent has kind of run out of card draw options at their point, you might just kind of overwhelm them with, hand advantage and value that way. So plus she's got a decent stat line on her. The 4/5 actually takes out, quite a bit of the early cost thing. So it might take a couple units on the opponent's side of the field to deal with this if they don't want to let you keep drawing cards every turn. And I think the one lore is like, they might think, oh, I don't know if I even want to take the time and the effort to get rid of that. So they might just kind of hope you don't draw anything good off of it. I don't know. I think she just is definitely something to consider playing if you want to run some control and just see more of your deck and have better options.
Yeah, I think the fact that she's inkable and, it shouldn't be too hard to get to 5. I think they really have to respect that card draw, and, she'll definitely be a target they want to remove. So if you're able to bait out some removal on that, draw a card or two off of her in the meantime, or even use her to sing a song, I think she is looking amazing, and definitely hoping to build a deck around her as well. Moving right along, we have Dr. Facilier, Remarkable Gentleman. He is 3 cost, inkable, sorcerer, storyborn villain with dreams made real. It says whenever you play a song, you may look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put one on the top of your deck and the other on the bottom. So with the 2/4 stat line and 1 lore, and then that ability, I know that with him, you might be singing Friends on the Other Side, or, another 3 cost or less song, or even in the later game, higher cost songs. Just the ability to look at the 2 top cards of your deck, put one that you don't want or that won't, serve you as well as the other one on the bottom of the deck, and, pave the way for a better draw on your next draw. Just seems like a handy ability, especially if he sticks around for a while, or even if you're playing like multiple songs, I guess, per turn. That might get a little interesting then, but you'll thin your deck a little faster and get to the good cards. So potential there. And also we will see there's a Floodborn character you could shift on top of this one. So yeah, another reason to consider.
I think this Facilier is probably more value than the one we had seen previously, at least in terms of if you're looking for a deck that lets you kind of sculpt your future draws. He's nice in that way that you can kind of put something you don't want towards the bottom of your deck and then, draw the more valuable cards. And so I think he definitely has a place in some more Amethyst control decks for sure. Next up, we have You Have Forgotten Me. This is a 4-cost inkable action in Amber, and the effect is each opponent chooses and discards 2 cards. So I think this is a very interesting card because obviously the person who plays it is losing 1 card, which is the card right here, but the opponent is losing 2. And if you play this at a time where they're on 2 cards or less, or maybe even just 3, they might have some things left in their hand that they needed more ink out to be able to play, or maybe they had a couple cards they wanted to play and they had to get rid of one of them or both of them. So this could just really stall your opponent and put them into an awkward
top deck mode
spot.
Kinda.
Now I'm not sure, this obviously doesn't develop your board or put any board pressure down. So, but I think maybe if you pair this with Emerald, which has a lot of other annoying effects that will kind of frustrate your opponent in different ways, including there is a song that makes them discard a card as well. And what I think is interesting is you can recur that song with Do It Again or Lady Tremaine and then make them discard a card again. And at that point, you're just reusing the same card. So you're not really burning through additional resources, whereas you keep making them need to get rid of a card. So eventually I think there might be a discard focus, possibly a mill type strategy like that. And it is value. Like anytime you get rid of a card in their hand, it's something they can't ink. It's something they can't put onto the, the battlefield.
Yeah, I can see this being kind of control-y too. Like if you can tell they're maybe ramping really hard and they're almost out of cards and maybe they're, sitting on a whole new world, but you make them discard their last 2 cards and now they can't refill their hand, and that might just almost win you the game right there, depending on what they're able to top deck.
And I could almost see teching in a couple copies of this if you're running a very lore aggressive, maybe like a Amber Emerald deck, and you've put some annoying characters down on board that get you a decent amount of lore, and then right before they can start dropping things that might deal with what you have, this kind of depletes a decent chunk of their hand, and then they might be closer to that top deck mode that you don't want to be at. So again, I'm not sure if this is going to be an easy card to pull off, just since it doesn't really further your board state. And
the fact that they get to choose the 2 to discard, like if they do have a big hand, then that would feel a lot less impactful. But yeah,
I'm sure someone's gonna play this on me.
It looks like kind of a fun card
and
to try.
It's gonna annoy me, so I kind of want to try a deck that's just like be really annoying and see if it's any fun. But
and next we have Pumbaa, Friendly Warthog. Was kind of expecting to see him since we have Timon in here, and here he is. He is a 4-cost inkable 3/5 with 1 lore. So I believe this was the first stat line that was looking like this on a vanilla that we'd seen perhaps, and just a different stat line or option of a character to run in a deck, whatever you see that it might fit in. If you're looking for a vanilla, more so for the stats, like for 4 costs, he's got a pretty high willpower, and that 3 damage will deal with a lot of units as well. So, and it looks like he's having fun here.
Next up, we have another vanilla character. This is Mr. Smee, Loyal First Mate, and he is a 3-cost inkable 2/5 Dreamborn Ally Pirate with 1 lore, so he definitely skews more towards the defensive side, but Amber seems to do that, I think, and that just, he might stick around for 2, maybe 3 different combat hits, and he might not be putting things away if they're a little bit tankier too.
But certainly against the weenies,
yeah, he's a good thing to have on board against decks that have like small, low-statted characters.
Yep, and now we have Ransack, a 2-cost inkable steel action card, which says draw 2 cards, then choose and discard 2 cards. So again, this is just another way to look a little further in your deck, maybe re-sculpt your hand to get things you actually want or have a need for. Yeah, I mean, it'd be, if you don't have, or if this is like, if you're top decking and this is the only card you get, it won't really do anything. But if you have a big hand and you've got some clunky uninkable cards in the hand, or just things that are too expensive, or maybe your later game and you've got like some low cost things that aren't going to be as impactful anymore, it's just a good way to kind of change your hand up to what you need in the given moment. So
yeah, I think it's a little awkward, I guess, because you're playing this card and then you draw 1 to replace it, and then you get 1 additional one, so you're kind of maybe going up 1. But then, like you said, if you find yourself at less, if you only have this card in your hand, you could play it, but you'll just end up discarding everything you drew. So little interesting. I'm not sure that it's that great, but
I mean, it actually seems like, do you go down 1 because you play this and then you draw 2 and discard 2, so you're kind of down this one, and then everything else stays the same. But like, yeah, I don't know. It seems like
I don't love it, but I guess if your hand's bad, it kind of helps you get rid of 2 things you don't need and, exchange them. So I think it's maybe better to use when you have a big hand, possibly after doing like a whole new world or something. But at that point, you have a lot of options. So next up, we have Simba, Rightful Heir. He is a 5-cost, not inkable, 3/5 Storyborn Hero Prince with 2 lore, and his effect is I know what I have to do. During your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you gain 1 lore. So this is just like Teika, the steel version, except instead of gaining 2 lore, when you banish in a challenge, you gain 1. And so this card just kind of, if you're ahead on board and it looks good to quest with him, you'd probably rather do that because it's 2 lore. But if you do need to do some board trading and stuff like that, he's nice because you can do board trading while still getting that 1 lore at the same time. And for being uninkable and only being a 3/5, it's like Pumbaa has the same stat line at 4-cost inkable, so
just the 1 less lore.
1 less lore, and you're probably using him a little more for combat focus. But it's just, I think the effect gives it some potential for playability.
Yes, and now we have Magic Golden Flower, which is a 1-cost inkable sapphire item with the ability Healing Pollen, which says banish this item and then you remove up to 3 damage from chosen character. So I like how, in the movie, this flower has the power to heal, and it's, translated into the game very well with that. It just will sit on the board and, offer you the ability to heal a character for 3 whenever that is looking like what you need to do. So perhaps if you have like a high willpower bodyguard and the opponent has partially challenged into it. Again, with healing, I'm not sure, like, if some people don't challenge until they've completely taken something out, you might find that defensively, it might just do more on your turn. Like, if you're the one initiating a combat that you're character will survive, then you could pop this and then, heal it back up to full so that it won't be able to be, challenged and banished on the follow-up turn. So it could be a strong card there. And then it also just has some item synergy with, some of the cards we've seen that care about having items in the deck. And
it's
being
very cheap to play as well.
And inkable. So
that helps.
Yeah, very flexible.
Next up, we have Mufasa, King of the Pride Lands. This is a 6-cost inkable 4/6 Storyborn Mentor King with 3 lore. No ability, but that 3 lore is very nice. So before we'd seen the 5-cost inkable Maleficent, that's a 3/6, same amount of lore, and this basically, for 1 additional ink, you get 1 additional strength. So if you're trying to do kind of like a mid-range ramp into some heavy lore amounts, then I think running both the Maleficent and this Mufasa would be probably pretty annoying for your opponent, because 6 willpower is a lot to get through, especially if you're ahead on ink and they have lower ink characters on board that probably don't have this amount of strength to just get rid of them in one hit. So I do like that they're kind of giving some more mid-range options for ramp as well, and these seem to progress you faster towards that 20 lore.
Yeah, I'm curious to see, once we start playing and get the cards and build decks, like which types of vanillas or stat lines will be, most advantageous to run. Like, you compare this to the Maleficent, like you said, and that's a 5-drop. Maybe it'll depend on, the composition of your deck. And if you're pretty heavy on the 5-drops already, maybe you put this in at the 6th spot.
Yeah, I know if you're doing like a good job ramping early, I think you can get this out on turn 4. That might be the earliest, but definitely you can get it out by turn 4. And, if I'm playing a 4/6 with 3 lore on turn 4 and your opponent doesn't have an answer, this might get you 6 or 9 lore, before they can react. So
yeah, I definitely like the stat line on Mufasa. And then we have Grandma Tala, Storyteller. This card looks amazing. Yes, it is 2-cost inkable 1/1, so the stat line isn't great, and 1 lore though, but the effect is where it really shines. It says, I will be with you. When this character is banished, you may put this card into your inkwell face down and exerted. So that right there is another way for Sapphire decks to help ramp up your ink total, so you can reach a high ink count, go well above what you would normally be able to do. And just the fact that she's inkable herself, and you could even, let's say, play her on 2 and then use her on a follow-up turn to sing 1 jump ahead, and then go up even further. I do wonder if some opponents will try to shy away from, challenging her and banishing her. But if they see you, singing 1 jump ahead with her, and maybe fear that you might do that again, or just, see you questing turn after turn with her, they might decide it's good to, take her out, which will give you that extra ink. And you can always trade her in yourself as well in a combat, especially if you know, like, you are going to need that extra ink that she'll provide next turn to let you play a certain pivotal thing that you're trying to curve up to. So very cool art as well, and it's just so fitting with the movie and the story.
I think what's cool about this card is you just play it and you don't even care if they banish it, and you probably want to run it in early, because if you're ramping, you want to hit those high ink numbers
as fast
as you can. So this is great, because normally you play a card from your hand, like when you play that Mickey, like, yes, he puts a card from the deck in there, but with Grandma Tala, you can ink something, drop this, and then she becomes ink later, down the road. So this is the only character that, like, once it's on board, it eventually ends up in your inkwell, unless it gets, bounced or something. So just another way for Sapphire to ramp, and I love that it's inkable. So if you see this in the late game and you still need a little bit more, ink, possibly if you're playing like the Bell strategy or something, you could just throw it in ink as well. But she eventually becomes ink. At that point, you might want to just ink her, because there's a delay to when her ink is usable.
So it's kind of the inverse of Mickey a little bit, but the fact that she is inkable will just give you more flexibility. Like, you won't be stuck with certain cards that you're forced to play.
And I do love how this is probably the best option for the 1 jump ahead card, just because not only are you singing with this, but then she can become ink as well.
Right, so you're accomplishing a couple of things at once.
Yes. Next up, we have Shield of Virtue, and this is a 1-cost inkable item in Ruby, and it has the ability Fireproof. So you exert this card and pay 3 to ready chosen character, and that character cannot quest for the rest of this turn. So this has a lot of potential applications. You can use it on your opponent's characters as well. So one thing you can do if they have bodyguard, you can ready the bodyguard so that it no longer has the bodyguard effect in play, and then you can get around that bodyguard and target some of the more valuable characters on your opponent's board. If you're playing, let's say you're running a card that you want to protect, you can quest with it and then ready it so that it's no longer able to be challenged. You can also use this on characters that have banish effects like Mulan or Aladdin. So if you can banish something with Mulan and ready her again and then banish another thing, that's very impactful. Same with Aladdin. So it's very flexible, and what I like about this effect on an item is that you might not need it in a certain turn, and especially when you play it right away, you just know like at some point in the game you might actually have enough ink left over to use this pretty consistently, and when you do need it, for a cost of 3, you can create some additional value and some fun plays. So I think it's really cool, and it's inkable, and that's always great.
Yep. And next we have Stitch Abomination. Love the art on this one. 6 cost, inkable, 4/6 with 3 lore. So the same stat line as the Sapphire Mufasa we recently looked at. So yeah, if you're playing Ruby decks and you feel that is a stat line you want to run, or you're just a huge fan of Stitch, then this is a nice option to include.
Next up we have Captain, Colonel's Lieutenant. He's a 5 cost, inkable, 6/5, Storyborn Ally Captain, and no effect, and 1 lore. So this is really, it's the inverse of Cerberus. It's a 6/5 instead of a 5/6, but everything else is pretty standard. Just basically a character that's good for doing combat, not as great for doing lore, but seems like well-rounded for the cost.
Yeah, and also it seems like his cost and his 6/5 is like equal to the Maui that we saw in Ruby as well. Just this one has the lore and does not have the rush. So depending on what you're looking to accomplish in that 5-drop slot, there's some options.
And if you want to run that Starkey card, he gets benefits whenever you're playing a captain, and this captain happens to be a captain as well. So
right. And now we have Steal from the Rich, which I think is a very exciting looking card. 5 cost, uninkable, emerald action. It says whenever one of your characters quests this turn, each opponent loses 1 lore. And as you can see here, it's a nice image from the Robin Hood film. Looks very fun there. And basically with this one, I can see this coming into play. Like, let's say you're kind of racing your opponent and you're each just questing, thinking you can kind of get there first. If all of a sudden you just play this and you, let's say, go up, maybe you have 3 or 4 questers, let's say 4, and you go up 4 lore, and all of a sudden your opponent loses 4 lore. So it's almost like an 8 lore swing in a way. You're just pulling that much farther ahead, and they're falling 4 behind the win condition. So you could really surprise an opponent, or maybe they thought they were about to win, so they didn't respect your board, and then you just play this and quest, and then maybe you're 1 turn away from winning, and now you've set them back a turn. It has a lot of potential that way. It might be a little risky to run because it's uninkable and a 5 cost, and it's not a song, so you can't sing it for free either. And it does kind of bank on you having a decent wide board to get like enough value to make it feel like worth playing. But yeah, I think just as another option of a way to steal lore from an opponent, this is, a good option. And in multiplayer, wow, I mean, it's taking 1 lore from each opponent. So again, definitely a card to watch out for if you're against Emerald.
Next up, we have Mad Hatter, Gracious Host. He's a 5 cost, inkable, Storyborn, 2/4, and 3 lore, so a nice amount of lore for this cost. And the effect is Tea Party. Whenever this character is challenged, you may draw a card. So it's very interesting to me that this card so far, I believe, is the only card draw in Emerald. So if they can remove this with an action, then you won't get any card draw out of it. And I think having that 3 lore, he's definitely going to be a high target. But a lot of Emerald characters are annoying when they're banished in challenges. So earlier on in the game, they might be using their removal on some of your earlier stuff. And then at that point, they may need to challenge into this to stop you from getting 3 lore every turn. So if they, ideally for them, they would want to have something that can clear it in 1 hit. so that they don't give you multiple cards out of him. But I think he's just really fun because he kind of creates an immediate threat that needs to be answered. And as long as they hit him once, you're going to replace the fact that you played him by drawing that with that one card. So
I really find this
to be exciting. And when I looked at the foil version of this on the companion app, it looks like all of the tea that's being poured into the pots, that is really selectively foiled and looks cool. So I'm hoping to pick up some of that in foil.
Oh, yeah. And next we have Cinderella, Gentle and Kind. She's a 4-cost inkable, 2 strength, 5 willpower character, again with that higher willpower, 2 lore, and she has Singer 5, like that Ariel super rare card that we have seen earlier in the set. And so that Singer 5, that could be a pretty powerful ability. Now on her, she already costs 4, so the Ariel costed 3 and you're getting the Singer 5, so this isn't like quite as much value as that, but you're still able to sing songs with that 5 cost, which there are several like important, impactful ones, so that's good to know. And then she has an ability called A Wonderful Dream, which says exert, remove up to 3 damage from chosen princess character. So with her high willpower and good lore count for her cost of 4, and the fact she can heal other princesses, she seems like she would be right at home in a princess deck, healing them up after they've taken some damage. Maybe the opponent starts to chip away at Moana, because Moana doesn't get to, re-ready herself. And if she's able to just top them up, then that can just delay your opponent being able to take down that Moana, and really keep your other princesses questing and protected then going forward. So a good option to include in a princess deck.
Yeah, and that Singer 5 makes her flexible, because a lot of the powerful songs do cost 5.
Yep.
There's several good ones there, so just being able to sing at a slightly reduced cost of a character is nice. Next up, we have Dr. Facilier, Agent Provocateur. So this is a Floodborn version, Villain Sorcerer, 7 cost, not inkable, but he has 4 or 5 stats, and you can shift him for a cost of 5. The 3 lore is really nice on this. Both of the lower cost Faciliers have 1, so if you do shift him, you're going up +2 lore on the lore value. And then his ability is Into the Shadows. Whenever one of your other characters is banished in a challenge, you may return that card to your hand. So if you have a bunch of characters ready to challenge and your opponent has some exerted things, you could drop this down and then use those in the challenge first, and anything that would be banished just goes back to your hand. So it lets you kind of really gain advantage in terms of, now I can play all of these again. My opponent just lost, several units probably. Another thing, and the 3 lore is great too, so even just shifting and questing for 3 instead of 1.
This just really puts the pressure on your opponent to have like direct removal actions to get rid of your characters, instead of having to, challenge and just send it back to your hand.
Yeah, and if they can't answer the Facilia, they certainly don't want to waste all their resources and characters getting rid of your other things, only to find that, you get the value back, you get to play him again, and they have to remove him again. And so this is kind of like that Mickey Mouse in Amethyst, where you want to deal with him before you deal with the brooms. So here you want to deal with Dr. Facilier before you deal with the rest of your opponent's board. So it'll make some interesting plays and problems for players, I think, at times. And the shifting ability, that's just nice because it could come out as kind of a surprise. So you got to watch out for that if they have at least 5 ink.
Yep, and 3 lore on turn 5 is pretty great. Then we have Jasmine, Queen of Agrabah, 5 costs inkable with shift 3, so you could get her out on turn 3 if you have 3 ink. And then she has the Caretaker ability, which says when you play this character and whenever she quests, you may remove up to 2 damage from each of your characters. So again, a healing option right there, and she has 2 strength and 5 willpower, so stat-wise looking pretty weak for the cost of 5, but again, if you were able to get her out earlier. Now, actually, Jasmine, I think so far, do we only have the 3 cost?
Yeah, I think we only have the 3 cost 3.
So you might actually have to wait till you've gotten her established first, and then shift on top of that Jasmine. So I don't know if you really could get her out for that cost of 3, but on turn 3, I mean, but it is a reduction at least in the cost when you do play her. So you could, get her out cheaper on a later turn and then still have ink left over to do additional stuff.
I think I would prefer to hardcaster for 5 too,
Yeah,
just
that's always
because
an option.
you know that way you at least have the 2 lore on both of your Jasmines, and
Yeah, the base
and you're
Jasmine's
not
already
sharing
2 lore.
stats, because this one actually loses a strength and only gains 2 willpower. So you know, unless you're going to get some really big value in her ability on that turn, then I think I'd maybe just wait, you know, a couple turns more and drop this on 5.
Yeah, I agree.
And especially healing, you know, we've yet to see how effective healing is going to be, but
She is yet another princess to consider running in the, you know, let's say Amber Sapphire Princess deck, if those were the colors you decided to go with.
yeah, and if you are able to build a big board of princesses that have decent willpowers, like, you know, Cinderella with 5, Jasmine with 5, there's a lot of healing that it seems like the princess faction can do. So if they get behind bodyguards and you're able to keep healing up either the princesses when they get some damage in on those, it's just going to be nice to, and even Jasmine heals all your characters, so there's flexibility there, and I think it could be really exciting if people are able to build these princess decks that have a lot of synergy.
Yeah, and perhaps a bodyguard deck as well, where you might be getting challenged into, or have, you know, built it in a way where you're intending to do some challenging with them too. You know, maybe you can splash some damage then on all your characters and then heal it up with her. So again, I'm not sure how great healing will be in this first set anyways, but you know, there are definitely uses for it, and she seems to provide a lot of it.
Next up, we have Work Together. This is a 1-cost inkable action in Sapphire, and it says chosen character gains support this turn. So basically, this gives you flexibility in making trades. If you have a character that can quest, then you can add their strength to another character, and then that character can do a more favorable trade, most likely. It's inkable, so you know, if you never find a moment when that works, you can always throw it in ink. But you know, the support keyword is interesting to me. You can play around it if you see it on the board. I think maybe the value here is you can surprise them. They might not know it's coming, so they might exert something they didn't think you could remove. You know, I don't think I'd run a whole lot of this necessarily, but you know, maybe putting a couple in a deck that wants to make some early trades might be a good idea, just in case it becomes relevant.
Yeah, because I think with this one too, it's interesting. I think you're right about the surprise factor with this, because otherwise you could just play the 1-cost inkable Scepter of Arendelle, which has the same ability basically. You exert that and you grant a character support for the turn, and unlike this one, you know, that character or that item will stick around and be usable every turn going forward.
Yeah,
so
I think if
again,
support is like vital to your strategy, then you'd want to lean towards running the Scepter so you can do it over and over again.
I guess if you're playing a deck that cares about playing actions, like that Genie card we talked about, or the Mickey Mouse Artful Rogue, then I guess, you know, you might consider this card as well. But outside of that, I would say the Scepter is probably stronger, unless you really care about that surprise factor. So, wow, next we have a super rare that we were really looking forward to seeing as well, hoping that there was an ability like this. It is Mother Gothel, 6 ink cost, inkable, selfish manipulator. She has Skip the Drama, Stay with Mama, which says while this character is exerted, opposing character can't quest. So none of your opponent's characters can quest while she's exerted. You'll also collect the 2 lore if you quested with her, or maybe you used her to sing a song. Whatever the case, if you're able to ward her up and, you know, protect her behind a bodyguard or some combination of protection, it'll really frustrate the opponent, because now, no matter like how bad they want to quest, they have to deal with her first in however way they can. So that can really stall your opponent out and, you know, prevent them from getting close to that win condition. I think very fun control piece if you're looking to do like an anti-questing type of deck and really control what your opponent can do. So
yeah, we were both really hoping there was going to be an effect like this in the game, that like if you can stabilize the board and kind of finally get control, and maybe you were against some aggro deck that just had a lot of lore, and suddenly if you can get a Mother Gothel down and get it protected, keep it alive, and then, you know, Emerald has a lot of tools that can, you know, bounce characters back, things like that. So maybe you get to a point where you can just kind of start targeting down any characters that come along, and even when they finally start developing some things, they need to sink 6 damage into Mother Gothel before they can get any quest value. So I think it's a very nice control piece, and is one of the spicier reveals that I was really excited to see.
So you know, a way you could kind of play around her would be like that Fan the Flames card, or kind of like that Shield card that we saw where if you're able to, maybe you can't take her out, but you could still unexert her, then she wouldn't be exerted anymore. Then you could go quest. So, another thing to be on the lookout if you are playing Mother Gothel against Ruby, just keep that in mind that they might be able to unexert your Mother Gothel unless you ward her up. So, ward might be something that's really nice to run with her.
Next up, we have Belle, Strange But Special, and this is a 4-cost inkable legendary card with 2/4 stat line, Storyborn Hero Princess. 1 lore pit, but that's deceiving because her second ability, my favorite part, says that while you have 10 or more cards in your inkwell, this character gets +4 lore, so she could be 5 lore. And then also read a book. During your turn, you may put an additional card from your hand into your inkwell face down. So 10 lore sounds like a lot initially, but with the ramp that Belle allows you to do, as well as some of the other new ramp cards we've seen and the ones we knew about before, there are a lot of ways to get more ink into your inkwell. And then also with cards like A Whole New World, you could potentially get another hand of 7 cards so you can keep the ink flowing. And it's probably with Belle you can get to 10 ink a lot faster than you might think possible. And at that point, she's worth 5 lore, which is the most in the game, other than if you have a Hades, let's say, that is really stacked, or even that Tamatoa gets more lore with items. But just to have 5 lore on 1 card, that's 25% of your win condition with 1 quest. So, and she does have 4 willpower, which is definitely decent because that will survive several different types of removal. And in the Sapphire ink, you could be running Aurora to kind of protect her from removal cards, because you definitely want, ideally you'd get more than 1 quest out of her. She is kind of low to the ground stat wise though, so you may need some bodyguards in play. And I think what this deck, it might need a lot of parts at the right time in the right order, and so it might be harder to pull off like the win with this, but I think regardless, even as just a ramp piece, she helps you ramp early no matter what kind of ramp deck you're playing. And when you do get to 10 ink and you find her later on, I mean, that's just the cherry on top. She can really speed along your quest for that 20 lore because she's a great seeker of knowledge. She's very intelligent, and I guess she's getting a lot of lore out of that book.
When this card got revealed, there were a lot of people, ourselves included, that were just super excited about it. And yeah, I think just she really expedites your ramping. And if you're able to refill your hand, then you can just keep the ramp going, and you could find yourself with double the ink that your opponent has to work with, before too long. So yeah, a really good looking card, really high lore potential in the late game. I could see people really wanting to remove her early so that you can't keep getting value turn after turn out of the read a book. So and if they're using a lot of the removal on a 2/4, maybe you don't feel too bad about that. And
if you run her in Amber, there's several ways you could recur her from the discard pile, including Hades and part of your world. So,
and if you do get, like, let's say 2 of her out in the late game and then quest with them both, that's 10 lore right there if you have that 10 or more ink. So really quick way to close out the game. I think it just gives ramp a lot of potential to have a fighting chance against some of the more aggressive, low costed decks that we're probably going to see.
I think it might kind of be like a kind of a lottery type style play where, if you can really ramp out, then you need to refill your hand so that you can keep ramping, so that you can, get that high lore value on board. But when it works, I think it's going to feel really fun.
Yeah, and maybe you just want to use her to ramp to maybe not even 10, but maybe you want to cap out around 7 or 8, but you want to get there really fast, and she'll help you do that pretty quick too. And then you can start going for more mid-rangey, maybe you top out at like a Hades or a Maui type of cost line, and then however you want to play it. But,
and then if you find more cards to ink, I think getting to that 10 is definitely worth it.
Yeah, you can always go for that later.
Because a couple more ink to get you to that 5 lore value.
But this is definitely a card that I'm excited to try to build a deck around, try to get to that 10 ink, see if you can close out games with that. Very cool card. Definitely looks like a legendary card. So next, we have Sword of Truth. Also a very cool looking card here. 4 cost uninkable item. It says Final Enchantment. Banish this item. Banish chosen villain character. So I really like this card. It looks, like a little situational, but there are a lot of villain characters in the set. So chances are good your opponent will have some villains in their deck. And you can just invest in this, even if they don't have a villain in play that you want to take out right then and there, especially if you don't have anything else to do at that turn or with the amount of ink you're working with. Then it's just kind of a threatening card that sits on the board, and it really makes the opponent not want to play any villains, especially any good ones. So, that might kind of slow them down, because maybe on turn 5 they want to drop like that 5-cost Maleficent with 3 lore, and you're like, oh, sure, I'll trade my 4-cost item for that. So maybe instead they play like a 3-cost or a 4-cost villain that they wouldn't rather play. It might slow down their tempo or be off curve a little bit, but just to try to bait you out, to try to get you to use this. So I think just having this on board is really nice and control-y. But then also, and again, with the potential, like you could banish, let's say, the 9-cost Maleficent for what only costs you 4, so that's nice. And then also the fact that you can use items right away. So you could just hold this in hand too, and then surprise them when they do play a villain. Like let's say they play the 8-cost King of Olympus Hades, and you quick just drop this out of the hand and remove him for half the cost. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of potential here. The only problem would be if like they don't have any villains you feel like using this on, and that again this is an uninkable card, so you can't ink it, you can't really get it out of your hand unless you have ways like the 1-cost Simba to cycle it out of there if you're stuck with it. So but yeah,
I think if this sideboard's in competitive play, then this is one of those cards you would probably put in there on Ruby. So if you find yourself against a villain heavy deck, maybe you put this into your deck for game 2, and then it's just one more removal option that's like slightly cheaper than Dragonfire, at that 4-cost versus 5. So
really cool to see the shield and the sword though in the first set.
Yes, and speaking of swords, here's another one. He's got a sword being held by Abu there. This is a 1-cost inkable action, and chosen character gets +2 strength this turn. So if combat is your thing and you just want a little extra strength boost, this would be a good thing to consider.
And next we have Tangle, a 2-cost inkable ruby action. It says each opponent loses 1 lore. So this card, it's got potential to take away 1 lore and more in multiplayer, but yeah, for me, I don't know how much play this will see, because you're not putting a body on board, you're only taking away 1 lore. It seems like unless it just perfectly saves your game, I'd rather be developing a character, doing something more impactful to the board state.
Yeah, I think the only deck I can maybe see this in is like a Ruby Emerald that wants to recur a bunch of actions, and then you just annoy them with some lore loss effects, and then you do it again, and then you make them lose more lore, and then make them lose lore with cards like possibly the Rapunzel that costs 6.
But I will say, I do like the art on this, and I also looked at this one on the companion app, and that hair is really glowing quite nicely. So it's cool to see anyway. I do like the fact that as we've seen this ability on the 3-cost Ruby Aladdin, where you play him and the opponent loses a lore. Here's just a way to do that with an action that's a little cheaper than him. But again, yeah, I'd rather probably opt toward playing that Aladdin than this card, but it's just an option if it does end up fitting in the deck. And yeah, maybe with the Mickey Artful Rogue, you could play this, they lose the lore, and then they also can't quest with the chosen character because of Mickey's effect. There's definitely ways to combo this with other things. But yeah, maybe one of the lesser actions that I'd consider running in most decks.
Yeah, I don't think it's that great. Next, we have Cut to the Chase, which is a 2-cost Ruby action. And this gives chosen character Rush for this turn. So, well, there are some times where having Rush might be exactly what you need. So, at face value, this seems like an effect that might be of some benefit at times, but then again, there's always the argument of, well, maybe you'd just rather this was a decently statted, unit that's gonna put down some continuous board pressure, and if you have to combat this with playing another character from your hand in the same turn, you're spending 2 cards to kind of rush one thing in, and it doesn't really buff the character in any way. So I think this could see some fringe play, but overall, I think it's a little underwhelming, and there's probably some better options to include.
Yeah, I think with something like Mulan would probably be an ideal target with this, because if they see Mulan on board, maybe they won't go questing or exerting their characters if they know that she can take it out.
I think
but
if I
you
wanted
could
to
rush
play
in, get
like
some
Rush
surprise.
with Ruby, I know you won't always pair it with Amethyst for like a Rush deck, but for example, Amethyst has a decent number of Rush characters on its own, and the Pocket Watch could give any Ruby character in an Amethyst Ruby deck that Rush ability, and you could do it, every turn going forward if you need it, versus spending one card to do it one time.
Yeah. So maybe just like
it's questionable.
The ability to give this to a character that doesn't normally have Rush, that could really benefit from surprising the opponent. But yeah, it would get kind of expensive, because then to Rush Mulan in, you need 7 ink instead of the 5. So I mean, there's definitely times where that might be viable, and it's cool to have the option. It's something to watch out for in case your opponent might try it on you. But yeah, it might get a little costly. And now we have Captain Hook, Ruthless Pirate. He is 7 costs, uninkable, Storyborn Villain, Pirate, Captain, and he has Rush built into him. And then he has the ability You Coward, which says while this character is exerted, opposing characters with Evasive gain Reckless. So this one, to me, he's 5/5 in the stats, and then he has 2 lore. So I think for his cost, he seems pretty low on the stat end, and then 2 lore for 7. The fact that he's uninkable also seems a little bit low. And then his ability, it just says when this character is exerted, the opposing characters with Evasive gain Reckless. So I mean, I guess if they had Mickey, Brave Little Tailor on the board, then if you rush in, take something out with Captain Hook, then their Brave Little Tailor, instead of questing for 4 lore, would be forced to challenge into Captain Hook, which that would be,
or whatever else you have on board exerted,
right? But. Sure. So that would be an ideal scenario, I guess. But if anything else can take out the Captain Hook, then all of a sudden they don't have to go on a challenge. And also, it's just while he's exerted. So if they are able to remove him, now all of a sudden their evasive characters don't have Reckless anymore and can just quest away. So I think overall this one seems pretty on the weaker side to me.
Especially that 7 cost uninkable, it might sit in your hand for quite a while.
Especially there's that that 5 cost Ruby Maui that is inkable, that rushes in and is a 6/5, and he doesn't have any lore, so that'd be the trade-off. But on all other aspects, unless you're like really worried about evasives as well, I don't know, this one just seems a little bit on the weaker, riskier side to run.
And I think if you run into a valuable unit, then most likely he's going to take a decent amount of damage back, and then be very susceptible to being removed by a weak character that they may have up, or a little bit of damage from an action in the hand. So yeah, I don't love this one particularly, just especially with that uninkable 7 cost. If you're not playing a deck that can kind of filter some of those out of your hand, then it may kind of clog it up. But next up we have LeFou, Instigator. This is a 2 cost inkable 2/2. 1 lore with the ability Fan the Flames. When you play this character, ready chosen character, they can't quest for the rest of this turn. So this is becoming a very recurrent theme in Ruby, the ability to kind of ready a character and then they can't quest, but either you're protecting them, or you're readying one of your opponent's bodyguards, or you're letting one of your characters get another challenge off. So it's very versatile, and I think definitely a nice card to put into Ruby decks that could best take advantage of it. And I think it really is probably a pretty strong card in this first set, where readying after you quest, or to get another challenge off, possibly to get more value out of your Mulan or your Aladdin or anything like that, seems pretty strong to me.
Yeah, and I liked you had told me about a different idea too, where let's say you play a 1 cost Lilo or Maleficent Biding Her Time on turn 1, and then on let's say your opponent then plays like a 1 cost 2/2 that would be able to take it out in a challenge. Well, normally, then if you went to go quest with that Maleficent or that Lilo, then they'd just be banished, the following turn, and they'd just have gotten 2 lore out of the deal, and then you might start to fall behind on board. But if you're able to, let's say, quest with that Lilo or Maleficent, and then on turn 2, once you quest first, then you drop LeFou with your 2, and then you ready that Moana back up. So now she's not able to be challenged by the opponent, and then you can hopefully get another 2 lore off of them the following turn. So, that's just a good way to, protect your own character, keep the pace and the tempo going.
And I think that's nice because he curves out nicely with those 1-drops that want to be aggressive.
Yeah.
So I can see running just a lore rush deck using LeFou as kind of a protection mechanism. You can also, especially in Amber Ruby, you can use, that 2-cost Simba as a bodyguard. So no matter, as long as you have one of the 2 options in your hand, you can hopefully protect that Lilo. But I do like this a little better than the bodyguard because it's possible they may be able to remove, the 2/3 bodyguard if they have like a Captain Hook down or something that does 3. And in that case, they could possibly get at your 1-drop. But here it just makes it unexerted, so they'd have to have an action or something to kind of get rid of it. So yeah, I really like LeFou here.
Yes, and now we have Sudden Chill, a 2-cost inkable emerald action song, which says that each opponent chooses and discards a card. So kind of like the Mufasa action we saw in the amber ink color, but this one, costs half as much, and they discard half as much as well. But this is in the emerald color, so with the ability to recur this, you could potentially play it multiple times. Again, maybe this is more of a card you save for like when they're running low on cards, and it might really hurt them to discard. Maybe you've established your board in the earlier game, and then you play this later. And then perhaps as well, if you combo with things like the Flynn Rider, who also makes them discard if they get challenged into, really just weeding the options out of your opponent's hand and trying to pull ahead that way. So
and the fact that you can sing this one also is nice because you don't really have to play this and then like a lower cost thing to kind of fill out your curve. You could play your full ink value on something else while then singing this with a 2-cost unit. So eventually I think that mill strategy, possibly milling out the hand, this is another great card to consider for that. I'm not sure if there's enough there yet to really make a super viable one, but it could just be an interesting control piece, and they might need to discard a very valuable card if that's all they've got left, so it could come in handy. Next up, we have Ursula's Cauldron. This is a 2-cost, not inkable item in Amethyst with the ability Peer into the Depths. So you exert the Cauldron to look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You may put one on the top and the other on the bottom. So this is very much also a recurrent theme in Amethyst. Many cards like Yzma and I believe the new 3-cost Facilier, they have these kind of filtering effects where you get to kind of look at your deck, the next couple cards, and decide, which one do I really want to see.
The reflection song as well, that's a similar thing.
And then which one can I live without, and you kind of just get to do some manipulation of your deck there. So the cool thing is you can do it every turn, after you've played it, and it sits on board. So, who wouldn't appreciate a nice way to kind of sculpt your draws going forward? I think it could be big in some control decks, just to maybe run a couple copies, so you might see one, and it's never an effect that you absolutely need. You can probably have a smooth game without this effect going off, but if you really know exactly what you want to be seeing with your draws, this Cauldron would be a great way for some control players to kind of easier find what they want. So
yes, and here's another Ruby item, very cool looking, especially in the foil. When I checked it out on the app, looks phenomenal. Poisoned Apple, 3-cost, uninkable, with Take a Bite ability, which says you pay 1 and banish this item, and then you may exert chosen character. If a princess character is chosen, banish her instead. So this would be very good against princess decks. I know there's quite, a few princesses in the first chapter. And some of them, like Moana, would be a high value target to use something like this on. But yeah, just the fact that as well you can exert any character, whether they're a princess or not. I mean, you'd probably prefer to get a full, complete removal out of the deal. But again, this could combo well with Mulan if your opponent is sitting there not exerting things because they know you want to challenge into them. Now you can kind of force them to, and you can play this earlier as well, but you can just surprise them with it. So maybe you have your Mulan developed, and then you drop this and exert something that they thought was, safe, and now all of a sudden all your other characters are worth an extra lore for the turn thanks to Mulan's ability. So I think there's going to be a lot of versatile uses for this, and anytime a new princess character is made, this will, be a threat to them. And again, just a threat to any character. Another alternate way to get around a bodyguard too, if you have a need to, or no, not so much here. But yeah, just especially that the potential to banish a princess is really big. So
yeah, and compared to the sword, like Prince Philip's sword, I do like how this one at least has that ability to exert a character, as long as they might not have a princess, and whereas in that card they might not have a villain, but if they don't have a villain, then it doesn't do anything. So at least this gives you some flexibility if you realize like I'm not seeing any princesses in this deck, or I know these colors don't really run princesses, then unfortunately this isn't inkable, but if you have it out on board, at least you can exert something and maybe get a value trade.
Yeah, and being only a 3 cost, uninkable, like that's not very high, so you should have no problem putting this onto the board at some point if you need to, get it out of your hand, versus, it might be a little harder to spend 4 in a turn to do an uninkable card, but still doable either way. So really like this one, and the art is great again. And now
finally, this is the last card we have not covered on this channel yet. So this is Jafar, Keeper of Secrets. He's a 4-cost inkable amethyst character with 0/5 stat line, Dreamborn Villain Sorcerer, and he has 2 lore. So for 4 cost, 2 lore is pretty good, especially with that 5 willpower. So even right there, I like him, but he also has an ability, Hidden Wonders. This character gets +1 strength for each card in your hand. So he's very interesting in the way that if you're able to draw a lot of cards, such as maybe using Friends on the Other Side, or the Amethyst Maleficent, or even, maybe you play A Whole New World and you go up to 7. His strength is highly flexible, but I don't even think that's like the main thing with him to be excited about. I guess I just kind of like how he seems like something you'd want to quest with, and then just as an added bonus, if you have more cards, he's going to be less desirable for your opponent to hit into because he'll dish out a lot of damage back.
Yeah, I think he has potential to be like really well statted for his cost if you have a lot of cards in hand, and we know Amethyst has some of the best card draw options in the game so far. So yeah, combined with his 5 willpower and 2 lore, I think you're right. I think he's a great card to just go ahead and quest with, make your opponent feel the need to remove him, or just, the fact that he's pretty safe maybe because they'll kind of leave him alone. But with that 2 lore, it's something you can't really leave alone forever. So.
And then from an art standpoint, I think we both really liked this card because definitely. Just the sheer size of Jafar compared to that camel that's just standing there kind of on the desert floor. Jafar definitely looks like he's kind of become the Cave of Wonders a little bit. Only he's looking slightly more sinister, of course. And even the Cave of Wonders was scary, but this guy, he's just
I'm really hoping
scarier to me.
Really hoping that camel's gonna be all right there. He looks like he's right in Jafar's path, and he doesn't look too happy, Jafar. But really cool to see him as the Cave of Wonders, and love how the desert, it's kind of taking on that amethyst purpley color on all the sand as well.
Yeah, they really did a good job of capturing the
I do think
color
the camo is just one of my favorite parts of that too. Just the size of it, it's pretty epic. So
with that, it has been very fun reviewing the cards from the first chapter set as they've been coming out. It feels like we started this channel quite a while ago. I know a lot of other content creators got started even well before we did, but it's just, we're thrilled to be a part of this community. This game looks very exciting.
Yes.
The team behind it has been very, very nice lately about, sharing information, and just even they seem very excited for this game to finally get released. And it's been a long wait. I'm sure everybody else feels that too. We're getting, I think, even more and more antsy for this to come out the closer we get. So it feels like, the days to release they seem like they're kind of dragging by, but at the same time, I know it's almost here, and it's going to be really fun when we can finally all hopefully get some product and enjoy putting these decks together and playing with these fun Disney characters that we all love.
Yeah, we've been looking at this game and, studying it for quite some time, looking at all the reveals very excitedly, and then just thinking about how they'll all play, but we're excited to, finally get the cards and then, start playing and seeing what works and what doesn't, and just finding what we really enjoy in terms of what types of decks to play. And it'll just be cool to see what everyone else, settles in on, and other ideas that people come up with.
And the other cool thing too is like once the first chapter's out, we can always be playing with what we have, and then we can continue to look forward to the future sets being released, because I know there's been talks that it seems like they're already working on at least set 5, and they have plans to at least let local game stores get the product early for, I think they said, the first 7 sets. So it sounds like they definitely have plans in place to keep this game going for at least a couple years, and hopefully much longer than that, because I think this game could be highly successful. The hype for it seems pretty intense, and I don't think the passion for Disney or trading card games is going to lessen anytime soon. So it'll just be very fun to see where this game goes.
Yeah, and I guess next week is Gen Con, and there are a lot of people excited to be going there. And there will be product on hand and events as well, the starter deck challenges, and then a final round as well with currently, as yet undetermined pricing for that. So it'll just be cool to kind of stay tuned to the news with that and see what goes on. And then I know a lot of LGSs are having some launch day events that they're putting on themselves. We're currently signed up to do a starter deck challenge ourselves, so we're excited about that since we won't be able to make it to Gen Con. But we're just really excited for the launch of the game, and I know everyone else that's been so excited too is just ready for that. And once it's out, we'll be playing it a lot. So
thank you for staying with us. And when the game is here, we do plan to possibly do some box opening videos, as well as some gameplay, and just kind of see how that goes. And then really just we're planning to be playing a lot and diving into the game, and so we'll probably spend a lot more time on the playing side of things, and just trying to get a little more versed in actually what it feels like to be playing with the real
keep our eyes peeled for any set 2 spoilers whenever those start arriving over the internet. So
yes,
that'll be exciting as well. But it's been a pleasure to look at this first set, and just all the artwork and the abilities and the characters that have been finding a spot in the set has been great to see. And so that's been a lot of fun, and now we're just ready for everyone to start enjoying the game. So
that's a wrap on the first chapter reveals, but we're just starting off now on the beginning of an amazing trading card game experience, and the games are about to begin. So
thanks so much for tuning in.
Yes, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you later.
Yep.